Welcome, everyone. Connect with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learn from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, we would love to connect. So on Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. I would like to welcome you all to this special rebroadcast of New Jersey Tutoring Corps Lessons in Accelerating Learning Recovery. Because this is a rebroadcast, there will be no live presenters, but we encourage you all to introduce yourselves in the chat box where we will be sharing links throughout the session. All of these links will be forwarded to all registrants in a follow-up email. Additionally, we do invite you to follow along on the conversation on Twitter using hashtag Learning Tuesdays, and again to tag us at Reading by Third. Joining you now is Sarah Torian, Senior Consultant for the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Sierra, and welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us for today's Funder to Funder conversation, New Jersey Tutoring Corps, Lessons in Accelerating Equitable Learning. These funder-focused sessions are designed to bring together funders working at the national, state, and local levels for peer sharing and peer learning. And today's session provides a wonderful example of the power and potential of this kind of peer learning, as it features the New Jersey Tutoring Corps, a research-informed, high-dosage small group tutoring program launched in New Jersey this summer with philanthropic support from the Overdeck Family Foundation, which drew on advice and insights from its philanthropic colleagues at the Bill and Chrissy Haslam Foundation in Tennessee, which had launched the Tennessee Tutoring Corps back in 2020. No need to recreate the wheel when we can learn from each other, and this partnership is a perfect demonstration of that. So today's conversation will include leaders from both of those foundations, the lead implementation partners of the New Jersey program, and 4 other funders who are also investing in high dosage tutoring and/or efforts to improve third grade reading proficiency. The data is clear on the impact of pandemic precipitated school closures and related disruptions. Without in-person instruction, or equitable access to digital learning resources, many students have fallen farther behind and disparities have widened significantly. The evidence supporting high dosage small group tutoring is also compelling, but the question becomes how best to implement and scale this education intervention. So we'll explore responses to that question today, including the roles that philanthropy can play in the response. And to begin that conversation, I am incredibly honored to welcome and introduce our amazing panel for today. First, we have Laura Overdeck. Laura serves as chair of the Overdeck Family Foundation, which helped to launch the New Jersey Tutoring Corps program, as I mentioned earlier this summer, and is also the founder and president of Bedtime Math, a nonprofit that ignites kids' curiosity and learning by unleashing the fun in math. Joining Laura today are the 2 of her key partners in the New Jersey Tutoring Corps program, Catherine Bassett and Carrie Tarica. Catherine is the executive director of the New Jersey Tutoring Corps and brings deep expertise in the field of education, having previously served for 26 years in the classroom and held leadership positions at Pearson and ETS. Carrie serves as the New Jersey State Operations Director for Boys and Girls Clubs in New Jersey and has worked with a network of 22 clubs since 2012. Having previously served as Director of Content for the New Jersey After 3 network of after-school programs. So Carrie will share a little bit about how the tutoring program was integrated into the summer programming for several Boys and Girls Clubs in New Jersey. Joining the New Jersey Tutoring Corps team, we have 4 other funders with us today. First, Emily Barron. Emily serves as the Director of Strategy Builds at Gary Community Ventures in Denver, Colorado, where she is responsible for creating the conditions for successful launches and management of new build projects, including Gary's new Learning League tutoring program. Welcome also to Kelly Butler. Kelly is CEO of the Barksdale Reading Institute in Mississippi, where she serves as a liaison to state and national literacy-related projects linked to the Institute. She's authored 2 statewide studies on teacher preparation for early literacy instruction, and will share information on Mississippi's new state-funded tutoring program, Mission Acceleration. I'd also like to welcome Melissa Litwin and Jamie Simmons to the conversation. Melissa serves as the Early Childhood Program Director at the Henry and Marilyn Taub Foundation in Patterson, New Jersey, where she works with partners to promote reading proficiency by the end of third grade, including support for a local tutoring effort called Tutor NJ, also in partnership with the Boys and Girls Club in Patterson. And Jamie Simmons. Jamie is the executive director of the Bill and Cassie Haslam Foundation, which launched the Tennessee Tutoring Corps in the summer of 2020, as I mentioned earlier. She previously served in the administrations, the gubernatorial administrations of Governors Lee and Haslam, and as chief of staff for Tennessee Commissioner of Education, and also as a classroom educator. As I shared earlier, Jamie offered her advice and insights to the New Jersey team as they were planning for the launch of New Jersey Tutoring Corps this spring. So welcome to all of our panelists. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us and share your insights and experience with those in our network. Now, before we get started hearing from our panelists, just wanted to get a sense of who is in the room with us today and your engagement and involvement with tutoring programs. So we're going to launch a quick poll in just a second with 2 quick questions, and hope you'll take just a quick moment to share your responses to those. I'll play the Jeopardy song while we wait for folks to respond. Okay, Sierra, do you want to show the results? Okay, great. Looks like the majority of folks joining us today are involved in a tutoring program in their community or their area of focus. Quite a few of them, 40%, are partners in that work, and about a quarter are funders. And looks like a third, many of those were launched in response to COVID-19, with another 15% that were scaled after COVID-19. So that's very interesting to hear. Thank you all for taking a quick second to share those thoughts. Now we'd like to begin this conversation by getting a little bit of a deeper understanding of the New Jersey Tutoring Corps. And for that, I'd like to welcome Laura Overdeck into the conversation. Hi, Laura. Hello. So Laura, can you tell us, what was the impetus for New Jersey's summer tutoring program? Why New Jersey? Why high dosage tutoring, and why now? Was this something that had been percolating or that you've been thinking about for a while, or was this something that was a response to COVID?
I would say that we had been thinking about it for a while. I think it's important to remember where we were before the pandemic. If you look at the PIAAC, which is PIAAC, it's the adult version of the PISA, the International Test of Achievement, where countries get compared. For the adult test, if you look at where America was in 2019, we have a large fraction of adults who on the literacy front are reading only at the 6th grade level or less. And on the math front are not able to do the kind of basic math you need to live as an independent adult, as they put it. And it's something, in some places it's as high as 50 or 60% of adults are not hitting those levels. We have large numbers of adults who are operating on essentially an 11-year-old's skills, caring for dependents, taking jobs, buying homes. That was already happening. And then the pandemic hit. And all the disparity we had, because obviously we also have a country full of people who've gone to college, to grad school. We've had wild disparity already. Then the pandemic hit, and unfortunately, the kids who were already getting less of a good education and less of a toehold were hit the hardest. And you could see that it was making that disparity grow even faster. So here in New Jersey, I was honored to be part of the New Jersey Pandemic Relief Fund, to be on the board of that, chaired by our state's First Lady. We had successful fundraising that spring. And then as the summer went on, we said, well, what do we want to do in the fall on the education front? And our foundation for a long time has supported various tutoring efforts. And we also watched the research on it. It's clear that small group tutoring in high doses gives kids that individualized attention that can really give them a toehold. So we said, you know what? New Jersey needs a tutoring corps. Let's start one. And luckily, our foundation head, Anu Mali Patil, had connections to the Haslam Foundation in Tennessee. So we tracked down Janie Simmons, who's here, and she kindly took our call because we had read in the news that they had very quickly launched their own tutoring corps statewide that summer already. And we called to hear how they had done it and how could we replicate that in New Jersey.
Thank you. It's good to have those connections and know who to reach out to when in moments of need. So what did you and your funding partners, the New Jersey Pandemic Relief Fund, as you were mentioning before, what did you set out to achieve when you launched and began funding this program? Can you give us a little peek behind the curtain into how this came to be?
Yeah, we were very fortunate to find amazing partners quickly. Jamie will talk more about this, but in Tennessee, they had partnered with the Boys and Girls Club as an existing infrastructure that was kind of shovel ready to have tutoring happen. We have Boys and Girls Clubs here as well. So we reached out to Carrie Tarika about how we could use our sites here where kids already were. It's because you need the kids, you need the tutors, and you need a curriculum, and you need money to pay everybody. Those are the pieces. As for rounding up the tutors, I've known Kate Foster, the president of TCNJ, for a very long time. They are a stellar state school here in New Jersey, so we reached out to them, and they found Catherine Bassett, who stepped up to be basically the manager of this entire instant tutoring corps that we were going to pull together. And so TCNJ basically rounded up their partner teacher prep programs around the state to recruit the tutors. So we had the tutors, we had the kids at the Boys and Girls Club, and by the beginning of this summer, we were actually able to pull that all together. And it just, we knew it was important because we started with math. We have to remember that in math, you cannot multiply if you don't already know how to add. And if these kids were going to come back to school this year, to give them that toehold on the learning, you have to find their gaps and fill them in. And tutoring is the way to do that.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction to this program. I'm now even more excited to talk to your partners in crime on the effort. So Catherine, if you could join us. Say hi.
Good afternoon.
So we just heard from Laura about how you played a critical role in kind of pulling some of these pieces together. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you did in terms of program design and implementation, starting with, how did you design the program? Who were the tutors that you recruited? She kind of gave a hint to that just a second ago, but how did you recruit and prepare them for this role? And speaking of recruitment, I've read a number of pieces in different publications about some of the challenges that many tutoring programs have faced in terms of recruitment. Did you run into any staffing challenges like that? And if so, how did you get around those?
Awesome. So if you could go to the next slide, I'd like to share some numbers. We are in our summer program, which just ended in late August. We basically had 4 weeks to prepare for the program. I was hired on May 24th and we launched our training week on June 28th. We had 12 site coordinators in the field. All site coordinators are practicing teachers. We had 1 master trainer coach who is a longtime practicing teacher, a floating site coordinator to cover for people who had to go on vacation that was already planned or were sick or what have you. We had 23 sites, 16 Boys and Girls Clubs and 7 Y Alliance sites, 95 tutors, and the tutors were drawn from the colleges in New Jersey that prepare educators, so teacher preparation candidates, paraprofessionals, substitute teachers, and certified teachers, as well as retired teachers. We had approximately 2,000 scholars across these 23 sites. And if you could go to the next slide. We used a model that focused on K-5 scholars, and we worked in small groups, 1-to-1 to 1-to-5, no group larger than 5. It was a 7-week program, as I mentioned, starting on June 28th with training week and ending on August 20th. so 8 weeks if you count the training week. Our partners were the Boys and Girls Clubs in the Y Alliance because they already had the connections to the scholars as well as to the community. They had the trust of the families of the scholars. So they were a natural partner and a wonderful partner to our work. Each of the sites that participated received a stipend. Our site coordinators managed the sites, the relationship with the site directors. The site directors are the staff of the Boys and Girls Clubs and the Y Alliances. And they also were responsible for making sure that all materials that were needed were in place at the site, letting me know if they were not, and for making sure that the tutors were on track and doing what they were supposed to do. In terms of training, we trained all of our staff, all of our field staff, in the curriculum that we used, and I'll talk about that in a moment. We also trained them in social emotional learning skills, in social justice skills, in what it means to be a professional educator. So if you think about our pre-service candidates and the pandemic, many of them had not had the opportunity to go face-to-face in a classroom setting. And so we were able to train them in what it means to be a professional educator. What do you wear if you're going to a tutoring site? Who do you report to? What do you do? How do you engage with the curriculum and the manipulatives? We also trained our site coordinators in their responsibilities. So there was a lot of training going on during training week. And if you'd like to go to the next slide. Our operational model was that we managed from the College of New Jersey all of the different pieces of the program, including the technology. Every field staff member, every tutor, every site coordinator, our master trainer coach, all had an iPad, and they were able to use that iPad to access the curriculum, to access unit assessments, to show videos, etc. The recruitment and placement was challenging because of the geography of our state. Everyone thinks of New Jersey as being a very urban state and a very small state geographically. We're actually not that small, and we're definitely not that urban. There are large swaths of our state that are quite rural and don't have a teacher preparation program in their backyard. And so our challenge with tutors was distance. Many of our tutors traveled 45 minutes to 60 minutes, and in some cases more, one way, in order to get to their sites. And so we paid our tutors for their time traveling. We paid our site coordinators for their mileage traveling. Every site coordinator was responsible for 2 sites, so they were responsible for 2 locations. And they met with their tutors regularly. We met with site coordinators regularly every week to exchange ideas, problems, solutions, etc. And all of this information was shared via daily logs that the tutors kept and the site coordinators kept. If you want to go to the next slide. Our curriculum was math focused. With a short time frame and a lot of work to do, we decided to focus solely on math. We used a curriculum called illustrative math, which was enriched by Fun Factor. And Fun Factor is an auxiliary program to bedtime math and was offered at no cost to the tutors and site coordinators by the Overdeck Family Foundation, for which we are incredibly grateful. The Fun Factor program was incredibly exciting, engaging, activity-based, and Fun Factor not only trained the tutors and site coordinators in the Fun Factor program, but they also provided them with all of the manipulatives that they would need to conduct the Fun Factor activities. In addition to Fun Factor, each site had all of the manipulatives that they would need for the illustrative math curriculum, including workbooks, as well as actual hands-on manipulatives. Every site had a printer, and as I mentioned, the iPads and what you would think of as traditional classroom supplies like crayons, scissors, markers, etc. The lessons were a blend of content, activities, projects, games, and formative assessment. And one of my favorite quotes that we heard from scholars, and we heard a lot from scholars, were from 2 pre-K scholars at the Trenton Boys and Girls Club site. We went into the room to observe the tutor and what she was doing with the pre-K scholars. These were rising kindergarten scholars. And the Boys and Girls Club staff member that was with me said, "Do you like math?" And the first scholar said, "Oh, I love math." And the second scholar said, "I love math too." So this was the reaction that we received at virtually every site that I visited. So we were changing not only what scholars knew in terms of their math knowledge, but the way that they approached math in terms of their enthusiasm, their engagement. As somebody who is math phobic and always has been, it was very important to me to change that paradigm, to change that dynamic, particularly for our female scholars. And I believe that we were successful in doing that. Next slide. How did we engage with our scholars? I've put some quotes from our tutors on this slide, but essentially through the training that we provided to the tutors, particularly on the hands-on activities and the use of manipulatives, not relying solely on a written curriculum or a quote unquote workbook, and I hate that term, but we did have books that went with the illustrative math curriculum that had activities in them, but all of those activities were project-based and very engaging. And then we would enrich those with the fun factor materials. So that was how we engaged with the tutors, by really thoroughly, with the scholars, by really thoroughly training the tutors in what it meant to implement a curriculum that was project and activity based, and to enrich it with those fun factor activities, which were just so awesome. There's a quote at the top of this slide from the Asbury Park Boys and Girls Club, and I think that Carrie uses this quote in her slides, so I'm not going to read it to you, but to me, it really encapsulates what we were trying to do across the program at large. Next slide. And this is Carrie.
Thank you. That's a wonderful transition. And what a beautiful story you've just told in terms of the planning and all of the connections and support that you offered to the tutors and the programs, and then just to hear the reflections on the impact of that. I would love to invite your other part, there's Carrie, Carrie to join us now. So Carrie, can you tell us a little bit about how you took all of this preparation, this program that Catherine was just describing, that the TCNJ and her partners helped to develop? How did you integrate that into the Boys and Girls Club summer camp program this year? What was it? Did the parents have to opt in? Was it something that was all children participated in? Love to get a little bit more details about what this looked like on the ground.
Yes. So we actually had 12 club organizations in 16 cities participate in this initiative during the summer. And we had actually had very early conversations with Laura and the Overdeck Foundation back all the way to January about bringing this to clubs. So we did not actually target a specific subset of kids beyond the grade level. With our experience, we felt that all of our kids were really deeply impacted by the pandemic and had been remote learning for, in many cases, well over a year, and that really everyone needed this tutoring support. So we didn't have an opt-in. It was part of our overall program, and we basically embedded it in our summer camp the way we would embed art or swimming. So kids at the local level, clubs, built out each kid's schedule and included tutoring as a component of that schedule. And I think part of that is that we didn't create a scenario where you're behind and therefore you have to do tutoring. It was something that was part of the component and everyone kind of participated in it. And I think it led to a more positive experience.
Thanks. And it seems like the way that it was meant to be fun, it seems like, yeah, it is just like another fun activity that is a part of your summer camp day. So that's wonderful. So what did you see on the ground, Carrie? And, you know, we heard some of the feedback that Catherine was sharing from the tutors. What was some of the feedback you heard from the parents or from the kids, or from some, what in addition did you hear from the tutors?
We flip to the next slide. Thanks. So I think, we saw a huge impact on our kids around COVID. So we saw mental health challenges, social emotional challenges, a massive uptick in food insecurity, and obviously opportunity loss. So I think in order for the tutoring program to be successful, our club staff and our club programs had to kind of address all of those things in tandem with bringing tutoring, because if you haven't been fed, you're not going to be ready to learn. So, first and foremost, clubs engaged in making sure our kids were in a place where they could actively learn. Most of our kids had been out of school for more than a year, and as many studies have shown, in low-income communities we serve, English language learners, they were more deeply impacted by this pandemic. And so in the beginning in particular, we saw kids who had significant difficulty being successful with remote learning, lack of access to technology, Wi-Fi, a whole host of barriers that made it difficult. And so I think coming back into a tutoring program where it was in person, where it was in a safe place at the clubs where they already felt like they knew who they were and they felt comfortable being there, really created an environment that allowed them to learn on a great level. We can switch to the next slide. And I know Catherine's going to talk about the actual attainment in math skills, which was significant and obviously our primary goal. But I think the secondary impact that we saw was this increased interest in academic engagement, their desire to be in tutoring. Nobody thought when we started this that the kids would want to go to tutoring every day and be excited about it. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite stories about this, and I believe she may be on this call, is our executive from Patterson was walking around the club one day and stopped and asked one of the kids, "What's your favorite part of summer camp?" And the kid enthusiastically responded, "Tutoring," which of course shocked us. Nobody thought, hey, we're doing arts and swimming and robotics and tutoring is going to be my favorite thing. But a lot of kids were really excited about it. I think we saw an increased interest in math and STEM as they felt comfortable, as they grew back into an environment where they felt safe and capable of learning, they grew their interests. And then I think because we did not separate out kids and say, you're taking tutoring because you've fallen behind or because there's a gap here, I do think we eliminated some of that stigma of tutoring as being something because of a negative. It was a positive. We turned it into a positive for all of our kids. And I think part of that was very early on, we wanted to make sure that we were building excitement for our kids in learning and being learners again, having been outside of the classroom for so long. And there's just a very distinct difference between learning virtually and learning in person with someone with manipulatives, particularly in those younger grades where many of our kids are not reading. So to follow along, to be able to self-initiate is very difficult. And I think the other really fun kind of side effect that I don't know that we all anticipated was that the tutors really became members of the local club community, and they engaged with the kids and the staff at the club and really kind of helped create that safe environment, that place where kids felt great. And I think, the impact overall was huge, and we're very excited to kind of continue this partnership and grow it to cover literacy and some other components in the future.
Thank you for that. That's just beautiful. All of the additional benefits, that the kind of the unexpected but wonderful consequences from this program. Lovely qualitative feedback. I'd like to come back to you now, if we could, Catherine, to hear a little bit more about some of that, the quantitative impact of this program. What was the plan initially to measure the program's success, and what did you find?
Sure, if you could go to the next slide. Thank you. In terms of evaluation, we used a two-pronged approach. But before I get to that, I wanted to build on something that Carrie just said. As part of our training, we trained our tutors and site coordinators in asset-based modeling versus deficit-based modeling. And we were very, very focused, and they were very focused as a result of the training in working with our scholars through a lens of not you have gaps in math, but you have math skills. You're a mathematician. We refer to our students as scholars or mathematicians at all times. And we told them that they had great math skills and we were going to work with them to make them even better. And that asset-based modeling approach really worked. I think it was highly effective. In terms of evaluation, which is the question that you asked me, so I'll come back to it. We had a twofold approach. We did our own internal evaluation. We did survey evaluations of our tutors in terms of their experience. What went well? What would they like to see done differently? What did they like best, etc. We did surveys of our site coordinators. We also did evaluations of the tutors by the site coordinators. And then we did surveys of our site directors. So the Boys and Girls Club staff and the Y Alliance staff, from their viewpoint, how did the program go? What went well? What could we do better, etc. We also have an external evaluator. I'm going to take a deep breath. The Center for Research and Evaluation on Education and Human Services at Montclair University. So they are doing an external evaluation. We will not have the results of that until November, but we're eager to see the results that they found. We know what we discovered with our internal evaluation, but we'd like to learn from them as well. I have a quote on the screen from Carrie, and she invited me to cut it down, but I couldn't cut it down because I loved every single word. And the part that I loved the most is the last sentence. And she just said this, that the tutors became part of the family at the Boys and Girls Club. And to me, that was one of the greatest accolades that I could have heard, that we assimilated seamlessly into the program. We weren't a burden. We weren't an add-on. We were a genuine part of the program. Did I answer your question? Okay, let's go to the next slide. Some of our accomplishments, our scholars did increase in their math proficiency, and I'll show that on the next slide. But more importantly to me, our scholars engaged with math. Our scholars' enthusiasm for math increased. And that quote that Carrie just shared from Patterson, that tutoring was the favorite part of the scholars' day, was critically important as a piece of feedback, in my opinion. Something else that I'm very proud of is that all of our field staff really represented the rich diversity of the state of New Jersey. So New Jersey is not a predominantly white state. We are rich in terms of the diversity that we have in our population. And that was reflected beautifully in our field corps, in our site coordinators, our tutors, etc. The tutors themselves grew in their knowledge. So remember, with our pre-service tutors, and even with our paraprofessionals, substitutes, retired teachers, certified teachers, etc., many of them have been out of the physical classroom for the entire pandemic. And so having this opportunity to be face-to-face with scholars again was a gift. And they really grew, particularly the pre-service candidates, in their knowledge of what it means to be a teacher. What does it mean to be a professional educator? What does it mean to deliver individualized instruction? What is a manipulative and why do I want to use it? You know, basic things to more complex aspects of teaching. And they really grew in that knowledge. One thing that I would like to share is that not only did the vast majority of our pre-service candidates find validation in their decision to become teachers, one of our tutors discovered, teaching's not for me. And that is really important because we want teachers in our classrooms who truly want to be there. Oftentimes, it's not until student teaching that pre-service candidates discover, ooh, I made a mistake. This isn't what I want to do. And at that point, it's really too late. And so to have this young lady discover that early on in her education, I thought was critically important. The site coordinators, many of them were young in their careers. And this was their first leadership opportunity. And so they grew in terms of their leadership skills, their teacher leadership, and their knowledge of what it means to oversee a program and oversee that program implementation. Is that helpful? Okay, let's go on.
Yeah, let's hear what I'm excited to hear the impact on the students' learning. There's been so many incredible other benefits for all the people involved.
So let's go to the next slide. Okay. Our tutors worked with our scholars for 14 to 21 days over 7 weeks, so over a 7-week period. And what we used in terms of a more quantitative measure were the unit tests provided by Illustrative Math. And so what you're seeing on the screen are the results of one of those unit tests for grades K through 4. We didn't have a large enough N size to do grade 5, but you can see that there was growth in every grade level and that there was significant growth in grades 1, 2, and 3 in terms of where scholars started and where they ended up. Again, one of my favorite quotes is from that same group of rising kindergarten students. When asked, what do you think about this? What do you think about math? What do you think about what you're doing? Her response was, I'm going to be a math teacher when I grow up. And my goodness, what more could you want in terms of a success in overcoming fear of math, discomfort with math, lack of enthusiasm for math, to have a rising kindergartner tell you, I'm going to be a math teacher. I love this. So the data that we have without the external evaluation at this point is very positive and does show that our scholars grew in terms of their math knowledge, as well as in terms of their approach to math and their enthusiasm for it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Going from, as you said, many kids have a fear or dislike of math, but to move from that to absolute joy and love for math is amazing. And the numbers, this data that you're sharing is really impressive. So that's wonderful. So I'm eager to hear from all three of you now. So bringing Laura and Carrie back into the conversation, you've all shared such the wonderful accomplishments from this program, both kind of the qualitative and the quantitative benefits for the children, for the tutors, for the program, all around. What's next for this partnership? Are you considering school year implementation? I feel like I've heard some hints towards that from several of your comments. What shifts, if any, would be involved in terms of extending it into the school year, in terms of either partnership, staffing, approach? Love to hear a little bit more. And maybe we'll start with you on this question, Laura, and then hear from Carrie and Catherine.
Sure. Well, we absolutely began this with the hope of continuing because we know there's just immense need. I saw that in the chat, someone pointed out we have 600,000 K through 5 students here in New Jersey, and a very large portion of them need this kind of help. I think we have to remember that philanthropy and government play very different roles when it comes to funding things like this. Philanthropy, we're perfect for being the flywheel, the ignition, it gets the thing going, that proves the model, shows it can be done. When it comes to scaling, government has far more critical mass of resources. And so that's when the handoff has to happen. We know that a lot of funding has come into schools, and we know those schools, a good portion of it is to address learning loss, and they're looking for ways to spend it. And our tutoring core would be perfect. It's a lot of moving parts because the kids are at the school, that's where the money is, but they're after school, the kids and tutors are at the Boys and Girls Club. So that's what we're now trying to sort out. And my colleagues here are the ones on the front lines figuring that out.
Sorry, I was still on mute. So frontline folks, I'd love to hear from you, Catherine and Carrie. What are you doing to help figure out how to address all of these moving parts that Laura was alluding to?
In terms of the year-round program or the school year program, we are moving forward. You asked about changes to the program. One of the big changes, and as a former librarian, to me, an important change, is that we are going to include literacy for grades K2. And if you look at research data around grade K2 and younger, and I did my master's thesis actually on the impetus of reading aloud to preschool children on their performance in the middle grades, their academic performance in the middle grades. All of the research that I've looked at including research by one of my former colleagues at ETS, Richard Coley, stresses the importance of the verbal vocabulary that scholars bring when they come into school for the first time. And that verbal vocabulary, let alone their reading vocabulary, their sight vocabulary, really makes a significant difference that is difficult to overcome in terms of gaps as you move up in the grades. And so for me, bringing the K2 literacy into the program was key. And so that's a big and important change. We are also expanding the program. Instead of 23 sites, I was on a call this morning with my team. It looks like we're going to have 43 sites. And Carrie, I want to talk with you about that post this webinar, but it's looking like 43 sites. So that's a significant increase in terms of the number of sites and the number of scholars that we will be able to reach. We are still focusing the program on high needs areas. And so we want to reach the scholars who need our help the most. We want to reach the schools that need our help the most. For the Boys and Girls Clubs, the programs will be based primarily in the clubs, although there will be some Boys and Girls Club sites that take place in schools. For the Y Alliance sites, they will be primarily based in schools. So they have partnerships with schools, they provide the after-school care, and we will now be coming in to provide the tutoring services in the schools. We will be expanding the field staff to include coaches. So one thing that we learned from our master coach and watching our master coach work with tutors is that we need more coaches. And so if you think about the pre-service candidates that we're working with, the paraprofessionals, the substitute teachers, and even the full-time certified teachers, everybody needs coaching. We all need coaching. And so we're bringing in coaches. So coaches and site coordinators will share 2 sites. So every day, one of them will be on site at one of those locations, and then they'll swap the next day. The coach will be responsible for observing the tutors, offering them warm and cool feedback. And that's something that we trained the tutors on during our training week. And we will train them on again as we prepare for the school year program, how to receive warm and cool feedback, how to give warm and cool feedback. So every site will have a coach as well as a site coordinator. The site coordinator will be more focused on the logistics, the relationship with the site director, making sure that the tutors are physically there, that they're doing what they're supposed to do, but the coach will be responsible for observing them and offering that feedback. So these are some of the key changes that we're making to the school year program. Does that help?
Yes, that's wonderful. Thank you. Carrie, anything that you'd like to add to those shifts?
I mean, I think we're very excited to expand into the school year. We feel like ultimately our goal would be to have this year round. And from the very beginning, we've felt literacy is a top priority with math, because in those early grades, if you don't attain that literacy level, as we move forward, you can't move forward in any other subject areas.
Yeah, and as they say, even going back to the math, many math problems are word problems. So
Exactly.
the 2
Absolutely.
subjects go together and are so critically linked. Catherine, was there something that you were going to add?
That was what I was going to add, that we already knew, but we saw again very early on that if a scholar could not read, they had difficulty with a lot of the math, because math is not just numbers, math is also words. So we need to help with literacy.
So this summer program was funded, obviously, by the Overdeck Family Foundation, and as you were saying, Laura, the New Jersey Pandemic Relief Fund as well. How are you looking at philanthropic support versus public support through ESSER as you scale into saying? You were kind of hinting at this a little bit, I think, in your previous response, but anything that you'd like to add?
I think it's really just a matter of there's so many competing priorities right now. There's so many things that have gone off the rails at schools. And it also, a key thing we think about is that it varies from school to school. So one thing we're thinking about a lot is, as we look at New Jersey, where is the need the greatest? People probably saw the NAEP scores that came out last week. We see that over time, the top performers have actually kind of held steady. Kids with resources, kids who are in strong schools have not suffered as much, whereas in other cases, it's just gone crashing down. So, and then you have everything in between. So we're thinking about that as well. New Jersey, and I speak as a Jersey born and bred Jersey girl who loves the state, but we have home rule and all our districts do things on their own with their own curriculum. They have their own funding, their own tax base. Everything is different from district to district. So that's something we have to think about a lot too, as we figure out how to partner and how the funding can support this.
Catherine and Carrie, anything that you'd like to add to that?
I would just add, as Laura said, that no program can be successful being completely reliant on philanthropic funding. There have to be other funding sources, and we're well aware of that. We did not anticipate having a school year program this year. We came in so far under budget on our summer program that we have enough philanthropic funding left over. And fortunately for us, our philanthropic funders, Laura and the New Jersey Pandemic Relief Fund, were willing to allow us to keep the money that we hadn't spent to be able to offer that school year program. So we had thought that at this point in time, we would be solely focused on fundraising so that we didn't have to rely solely on philanthropy. Working with school districts who typically finalize their budgets in the state of New Jersey in March to April. So their budgets are long finalized at this point, but looking ahead to the coming year, to getting on their radar and getting into their line items so that they are using some of their ESSER funding, their title funding to fund this program so that we are not so reliant on philanthropy. However, we're running a school year program, and so we're going to be doing both at the same time now, which is wonderful. I mean, it's a gift. So it's exciting. At the same time, it's a challenge, and we know that we're going to rise to it.
Wonderful. Anything that you'd like to add, Carrie, before we leave the state? Or actually, no, not leave the state, but move to... No, okay. So not leaving the state of New Jersey quite yet, but building on what we've just heard from the New Jersey Tutoring Corps partners, we're now excited to explore other high dosage tutoring programs, both at the local and the state level, and those that are funded both through philanthropic dollars as well as through public dollars. And for that, I'd like to stay in New Jersey for a bit in Patterson and invite Melissa Litwin into the conversation.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. And I want to give a special shout out to my partner in crime, Wendy McGuire of the Patterson and Passaic Boys and Girls Club. Hello, Wendy, and thanks. So I want to tell you about the experience of New Jersey Tutoring Corps in Patterson, home of a grade level reading initiative and a Boys and Girls Club committed to literacy. And I also want to offer my perspective on what the program has meant in Patterson to me as a funder, and I think to New Jersey. So Patterson Reads is our statewide grade level reading initiative. It's both a single collective action approach to building a tighter network of support, more coordinating participants in our community, fewer holes for kids to fall through. And it is also many CBO-based projects that add up to a literacy-rich environment, which we call our stone soup for reading dosage. Patterson Reads, I think, can be partially credited with motivating our local Boys and Girls Club to apply to TAUB for Let's Go Learn, a literacy program in the fall of 2019. The goal was my kids read and do math. LGL does both. And that was Wendy McGuire, as an incoming director, saw it as a way for her to change something that she could control, which was the success of her kids in the program. The grant was designed to solve the student data access problem, right? Versus negotiating with the school district, we were now obtaining data directly from kids through their participation in this online learning tool. The tool identified kids who needed more and gave them the opportunity for the kind of small professionally led, relationship-based, high-dosage tutoring that we know makes catch-up both successful and humane for the children. Among other things, we dreamed of a Saturday school in the grant to ensure that kids would have time to slow down and learn. And then COVID hit. Among other things, TAUB released this grant and many other restricted grants to Gen Op as part of our COVID response. Boys and Girls closed and then reopened, not as an after-school program, but as a 10-hour-a-day virtual school with kids really needing playtime after hours. Boys and Girls kept the data collection going, but deferred on the rest, in part due to staff restrictions, which were COVID-based, and hiring issues. LGL became the only tutor, which we know is not ideal. Then in the summer, New Jersey Tutoring Corps offered new opportunities, but also built on what was coming into focus at Boys and Girls Club. The data helped tutors know their kids, and then the playful small group relationship-based and fun approach of New Jersey Tutoring Corps modeled learning at its best. It was a real live case right outside the director's office all day, every day. So what does it mean in terms of impact, best practice, and sustainability? I saw my friend and colleague, Wendy, and her team have a real aha moment around what it means to have deep interactions in small groups with skilled professionals, and how that really is the way to support learning. And I think that it led from a mindset where an online tutoring program might be enough to do the trick, but to seeing that while such programs have their place, it really is that small, meaningful relationship. And Wendy's now looking at ways to change her staffing model. So that's the club level. Looking at the Patterson Reads level, there's a chance to bring a city leader's new perspective to the collective and to all the individual partners who are also engaging with young children. So there's a group ready to amplify the impact across the city and to demand it for themselves. And as our full service community schools are part of Patterson Reads, Boys and Girls Club is active within school bounds, running programs and supporting the district directly. For TAUB, we took a risk in launching a new local literacy program without an obvious path to sustainability. Not smart, but lucky in this case. And now by aligning our work with New Jersey Tutoring Corps in the coming years, we can support the building of a system versus the funding of a program. So happy about that. And finally, as New Jersey Tutoring Corps has initiated a statewide strategy for out-of-school time learning, we can make this a springboard for a broader conversation about the tenets of grade level reading and what we know works as they move into the literacy space. So thank you. And I now introduce Jamie. Yes.
Oh, I'll introduce her. I just wanted to just add that it seems like the theme of this conversation is lots of connections. So learning from funders, but also making connections across the different programs. And now this, so many different connections and Patterson. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing that, Melissa. Sorry. So Jamie, I'd like to invite you into the conversation now. Earlier, we just heard your colleagues in New Jersey share what a resource and inspiration you were to them as they were trying to think about how to put the pieces together and make all of these connections and everything required to launch the New Jersey Tutoring Corps program. What are your reflections on what you just heard? And I'd love for you to lift up any differences or similarities from your program and what you just heard in terms of whether it's implementation, curriculum, funding approach, recruitment, anything.
Great. Well, so excited to be here. It's funny to think back on my conversation with Laura many months ago where this was just being dreamed up. And we probably were in the middle of launching the Tennessee Tutoring Corps because it was summer of 2020. And there was a desire in New Jersey to do something similar. So it's just an honor to be with you all and to hear the ways you took maybe some ideas that we had and clearly between Carrie and Catherine just developed a great model for kids. And so I'm the executive director of the Bill and Chrissy Haslam Foundation. Bill Haslam was governor in our state for 8 years up through 2019. And I think, to be honest, he just had a really hard time when COVID hit and he wasn't sitting in the Capitol anymore. And he saw just, we had a lot of students who were going to fall further behind because of the summer coming upon us. He's very aware of summer melt and what happens for especially low income and students of color over the summer. But he also has a passion for college students and inspiring potentially future teachers. So he, in April of 2020, came to me and said, how about we just like bring this all together? Let's get these kids together with these college kids who probably don't have the internships they used to have. Let's bring them together and do some tutoring. And I was like, who's gonna run that? And he was like, he allowed me to raise my hand, or forced me to raise my hand. And so I can relate to Catherine so well. We were talking about it in April, and by May 12th had opened up our application. The goal was, and you can flip to the first slide, the goal was to recruit 1,000 tutors across the state of Tennessee. Mainly college students was our focus, again, with a hope that we could recruit individuals into the teaching profession, or as Catherine said, help individuals figure out maybe teaching is not the path for them. So focus was on 1,000 tutors. We were paying them $1,000 out of the Bill and Chrissy Haslam Foundation. So they would get $1,000 stipend for working. Here's some similar, we did 7 to 8 weeks was our commitment, 10 to 12 hours each week. And we said last summer, or in 2020, we said we wanted tutors to work with between 2 to 5 students. I think I've seen some questions about like, what is the right number? We learned quickly 5 was probably just way too much, especially for a college student who may not have had much experience tutoring and had gone through training with us. So our second summer, this past summer that we ran it, we narrowed it down to between 2 to 3 kids per tutor. And I think that was the right move. And I think the research also supports kind of the smaller group. In the end, I think just the challenge of the governor and Chrissy really wanted to do this in person during a pandemic. And so we ended up only recruiting 450 tutors. Now we got 1,300 applications. So summer 2020, we had so much interest. Our issue in 2020 was we have all the tutors, but we're having a hard time finding the kids because a lot of our boys and girls clubs were operating at a smaller capacity. They were having to do a lot of distancing, and so they just couldn't have the same number of kids they normally serve during the summer. I will say, because I've seen some questions about this, our challenge in 2021 really changed. We had lots of kids to serve, and it has been a real struggle, I'll just be honest, to find the tutors at a continued stipend of $1,000. And so it's something we're absolutely thinking about for next summer. You can go to the next slide. So I kind of hit on these, and I want to get to the questions because I feel like there's a lot of good ones, but this was the purpose: meaningful work for college students, awareness about summer slide, addressing summer slide for a lot of our kids who we knew had been out of school an additional 12 weeks in Tennessee because of COVID. And then thinking about a pilot. So using 2020 as a means to figure out if we were going to continue on. I think also it's exciting to kind of add to this list. Maybe the purpose was also to inspire other states and other communities to think about tutoring, which is just humbling to see that has happened, and exciting to see just how far you guys have come with impacting kids. So we had 450 tutors. We tutored about, when all the math was done, a little over 2,000 students across our state. Tennessee has about 1 million K through 12 students. We just targeted K through entering kindergarten through entering 6th grade was our target audience. And we actually did both math and literacy. And that was just something the governor and Chrissy wanted to do both. And so we had curriculum from the foundation side that supported both of those areas. The next slide just gives you a sense of the breakdown of who did what. I won't walk through all of this, but just if you want a sense of like, what did the foundation do? versus what did our boys and girls clubs do? And I guess I didn't even say that, yeah, we leaned on our boys and girls clubs. The reason being is Bill hasn't wanted this off the ground in 4 weeks. And so what we needed was a place where kids were already going to be having some sort of summer programming, and we could latch onto that and say, they're already going to be there from 9 to 4. Can we take kind of 2 hours or an hour of your day and provide tutors who will come in and sit with your students? So the Boys and Girls Clubs across our state, we served, let's see, I think we were at 40 sites in 27 of our 95 counties, certainly with a focus in our more urban areas, but we did get into some of our rural communities just based on where our Boys and Girls Clubs were located. The summary of this slide is that the Boys and Girls Club brought the tutors, like we did the find them. We also provided the training. We also provided the curriculum. Boys and Girls Club was very much bring the kids and we'll meet together to try to do something well by kids. I tell people a lot, like this was a scrappy program. We just kind of were building the plane as we flew it, but I'm so thankful we just jumped in because we know kids, we know based on the research, kids are better off, but we just knew like there is something so powerful about in the midst of a global pandemic for these students to have a tutor showing up every day, sitting with them, hearing what's going on in their life. So there's absolutely the academic benefit, but there's also that kind of social emotional that you've heard about, which was so important and why we wanted to keep it in person. So next slide. Here's just a high level impact on the students and the impact on the tutors. The kind of big takeaway to try to summarize this slide is that we had our greatest impact. We saw growth across all our grades, but had our greatest impact in K through 2, which it sounds like there's some similarities there between what New Jersey found and what we found in both ELA and math. We did a nationally norm reference test. And so what we were able to do is see like how much growth is normal for these kids in this time. And essentially found that the growth we saw corresponds with 1/3 of the growth found in a national year-long study. So 1/3 of a school year of growth happened for a lot of our students, especially in the K through 2 grade bands. Really powerful. And then on the tutor side, just some really cool results around nearly all of our tutors, 98% of them said they would recommend the core to other college kids. You see here, and it's terribly cut off, and I apologize about that, but it says like basically I built an impactful relationship with a student. I have a better understanding that's probably about the value of tutoring and why it matters. So you see some high results there, which we were really excited about given how quickly we put this program together. And then, and there is a link in the chat, I just saw it go up, that gives more on our evaluation and what we saw. The last slide. So what did we change for 2021? I feel like we changed a lot, but just because we were learning, and I think we learned a lot from 2020, we absolutely did. We narrowed our grades. So we actually did rising first through rising fourth. We still kept it math and reading. The other key thing that it sounds like you guys did really well with New Jersey Tutoring Core was this training. I love, one piece that I love about your program that we didn't do as well was kind of that constant contact with site coordinators, constant feedback on how's it going, how can we make sure that your tutors are supporting your students. So we actually leaned on an organization called Peer Power here in Memphis to develop our training the second year, just because we knew our training the first year was not what we would want it to be. We did change our curriculum just to narrow the focus a little bit. Our first summer, we gave out these huge booklets, and I think it was just too much for kids, for a kindergartner to sit with like a 800-page packet was just too much. So narrowing our focus with our curriculum and then adding more eligibility criteria for our tutors. So as we found that we weren't getting as many tutors in 2021, we started expanding how many could apply, or who could apply, I should say. So we started to do some graduate students. We also recruited quite a few seniors who were going into their freshman year of college. We saw quite a few come forward and want to tutor last summer. And so I'll end there. I apologize. I took probably more time than I should, but that was kind of an overview of our program these last 2 summers.
No, that's wonderful and so inspiring and informative. And it's interesting to see how it shifted from 2020 to 21. I mean, the world kind of shifted from the summer of 2020 to the summer of 2021.
Yeah.
But also lots of lessons learned that were included in that plan. And we want to circle back to you later on in the conversation to kind of learn more about how this provided a model that then attracted public funding, because I think that's wonderful and important for sustainability. But right now we're going to hop in our car and head out west toward Colorado. And I'd like to invite Emily Barron into the conversation. Emily, love to hear you share a little bit about how and why Gary Community Investments is investing in high dosage tutoring, how you're making the case for state and local public investments in this strategy, and what, if any, challenges you are facing in that. And I think we'll move to the next slide for that too.
Great. Hello, everyone. Emily Barron, Gary Community Ventures. We are a foundation located here in Denver, and we partner with our communities to reshape the arc of opportunity for Colorado kids and families, particularly the lowest income families. I am part of a team within the organization. We are sort of the entrepreneurs. We are called the Builds team. And last year during COVID, we built an organization called COVID Check Colorado, sort of in this urgent need response spirit when we saw a gap, especially as it relates to schools and kids and teachers getting testing, accessible free testing. We decided that given the conditions and given the gaps, we were going to build it ourselves. And that's sort of our team's mandate. So fast forward to a couple months ago, it's so exciting to be on this call and hearing about what's happening in New Jersey and Tennessee, because we were certainly and definitely inspired by what you all are doing. We decided to stand up our own tutoring program, really, again, in that spirit that we felt like there was an urgent need and a demand. And we really wanted to launch fast in time for the start of the semester. So what we did is we decided to partner with schools and schools that had existing after-school programs and embed ourselves within those after-school programs, very much like the other programs that have been discussed here. We are really, really tied to the high-dose tutoring model and didn't feel like we had there were certain partners doing certain things for that model, but we really wanted to bring that all together. So Learning League is our high dose tutoring model. We are currently serving about 160 kids, and we have about 60 tutors hired. We have had great hiring success. We are having tutors making $20 an hour. We worked closely with universities in the Denver metro area. Indeed has been incredibly successful. We ended up with about 400 applications for this coming fall semester. And so we are still in that strange sort of more tutors than students. And the model is a high dose model. It's a 1-to-4 ratio using proven content. We're using Zern for math, and that's for grades 4 through 7, and Amplify M-Class Intervention for literacy for K through 3. And tutors are going into after school programs, same sort of organization structure. There's a tutor coordinator at every site that's got a little more sort of senior experience in curriculum and sort of group management. We're doing it 3 days a week and minimum 45-minute sessions, and it's a 10-week program. And by going through the schools, we've been able to get access to data. So we're developing sort of benchmark assessments for students, both in math and literacy. We're sort of early days on this since we're about midway through the program, but tracking progress incrementally in the platforms themselves. And then we'll see sort of at the end of the year, like many of you have all seen, sort of what's happened over time. In terms of challenges, I think, others have said it, it's been a really challenging year. And that has the reality of that has definitely played out in terms of this sort of unprecedented social, emotional, behavioral issues that it's challenging and distracting for tutors who are there to tutor, but really end up, having to sort of manage behavior. And that's been just a huge sort of reality check for us that, if the best thing we can do is get a caring, trusted adult in front of a child, that's pretty good considering the year a lot of students have had. The other sort of like very real learnings that schools are completely overwhelmed coming off of COVID this year. I think embedding ourselves, I'm so curious how others have managed this, but the expectations that schools could provide sort of a shared support system for us and certain infrastructure and even sort of basic needs like tables and chairs or a request for sort of a different physical space location has been really hard for the schools to find a dedicated coordinator to help or to even like answer emails in the time that we need. So those sort of reality checks have caused us to sort of check ourselves and determine where we can sort of allocate resources to make sure this is a program we can be really proud of and we can get the outcomes that we desire. So sort of looking ahead, we have so much we want to learn with this program. We are highly interested in the 10-week intervention, the dosage, kind of lower skilled tutor, like so many of you have tried, like a college student, really, if you give them the right tools and resources, help a child accelerate their progress. And then I'll just say we're also really hyper interested in sort of increased connectivity in a child's progress with, what a child being raised at home, a child learning at school, and a child generally having fun in an after school program. And is there a way to sort of bridge that information gap and have all of those trusted adults in a child's life sharing information and figuring out how to take action steps, whether they're at home, in school, or after school care. So we're doing some really sort of interesting experiments with communication tools around that, giving parents and after school providers access to some information and some prompts in order for everybody to sort of be on the same page and engaging in a child's progress together. But it's just to say, tutoring is really hard, and building this program, I think Jamie said it best, we have definitely taken the scrappy approach, and every day is an immense learning experience that we're really grateful for.
Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, it just pulling all these pieces together, it is learning, but it seems like you're capturing a lot of those learnings to inform future efforts, both yours and in other communities. So that's wonderful. Okay, so I'm not good at geography and planning the shortest route to places. So we're going to head back east and go to Mississippi, the neighbor of Tennessee. And I'd love to invite Kelly from the Barksdale Reading Institute to join the conversation now. Kelly, I know that Barksdale, as initially, and now the state of Mississippi, later made very significant investments in teacher training and coaching, something that we've heard a lot about in these tutoring programs, but the actual teachers and coaches rooted in the science of reading, and that's had incredible results for supporting children's early literacy. Building on that now, the state is using some of its ESSER funding, some of the public funds coming in response to COVID to support high dosage tutoring. So wondering if you could tell us a little bit about this program, Mission Acceleration, I think. What insights can you share about strategies for promoting public adoption of tutoring and other literacy strategies that were seeded with philanthropic funds?
Thank you, Sarah, and it's good to be here. I am excited about what this tutoring, the advent of tutoring in this broad scale can show us, because I think that we've learned some really important lessons in Mississippi, and I'm hearing those lessons as you all are talking about the program that you all are rolling out. We do have a program here, and we call it Mission Accelerator. I'm not intimately involved with that program, though it was the brainchild of a colleague of mine, Angela Rutherford, who is at the Center for Excellence in Literacy Instruction at the University of Mississippi. Angela and I have done a lot of work together over the years, specifically around teacher preparation. So I was excited when I learned that she was galvanized to do this tutoring program. she is also instrumental in helping us get Campaign for Grade Level Reading off the ground here in Mississippi. Mission Accelerator, and the director is Amy Shields, and there's I think a link in the chat that can give you some more information about it. Let me just give you some highlights. They're very similar to some of what you all have heard. We started with the summer pilot in 5 communities, which were all grade level campaign communities, tutoring 2 to 4 times a week, from anywhere from 45 to 120 minutes a day, for 7 weeks. The group size was 1 to 7 students. And what I want to say about that, I've heard you all talk a little bit about group size. I want to tell you that the research suggests that a group of 1 to 3 is just as effective as 1 to 1. And one of the reasons for that is that in reading, the kids need lots of repetition. So if you have more than 1 kid in a group, 3 is a great number, then you get a lot of those repetitions. And so that's something you may want to think about if you're trying to recruit tutors and you have more kids than you have tutors, it doesn't have to be one-on-one. The Center for Research Evaluation at the university is serving as the evaluator. And in the pilot project, the STARD Unified scores grew by 43 points, which is quite significant. They also looked at the impact on the tutors' efficacy using a scale that was developed by Ohio State University. The mean score of almost 8 points out of 9 points. So there was a great deal of efficacy that was built through the training that the tutors got. Can't emphasize enough the importance of training. When you finish that recruitment, it's really what's going to launch you strong. So in the fall, we have just begun in September and launching a full program, 10 to 12 weeks, recruited the best and brightest of the 250 college students. These are all located near college campuses. We call our tutors academic guides. And in some regards, that's sort of a bend to the Latin root of tutor, which means to guard and to watch over and to guide, which we think is kind of a nice way to think about these tutors, though they're not passive in any way. They are not just observing, they're certainly very, very active. The curriculum, and I'm interested in learning more about what others are using for curriculum. And I think this is a really important piece. We've been using Voyager's Passport, Sopris West Voyager, which is now combined Passport, which integrates all 5 components of reading and is highly scripted, very routine. It's not boring, but one of the things we know about teaching kids to read is that structure, repetition, and systematic is really the way kids learn best those foundational skills. And so I would encourage you, as you're looking at programs, to find ones. Don't be afraid of things that say scripted when you're dealing with tutors who are not used to and are not trained to teach reading. It's a very good scaffold for them. The State Department of Mississippi is about to release an RFP to launch a statewide program, and we're really interested in seeing what they do, and we'll be watching closely to guide them towards selecting good quality programming. Just a tangent to tell you all, part of what we did here in Mississippi was to blanket the state with high quality professional development and required all teachers to change their behavior. One of the benefits that I think this tutoring approach offers is by providing tutors with high quality materials and really good training. Tutors aren't coming in pushing back at you about, no, I'm going to do it this way. You are asking them to do it in a way that's been proven to be effective. And when they do it, and they do it consistently, kids will learn to read. And that's what happened in Mississippi. So one of the things I think is the magic bullet is giving that high quality training. And I'm going to say it again because others have mentioned it. The coaching is really critical. I can't remember who said it, the separation between coaching and supervising. Coaching needs to be focused on the acts of the tutor, and supervising are the logistics. And they're really distinct roles. They could be combined if you don't have enough personnel, but don't underestimate that key important role of the coach, giving feedback to tutors as they're going along. I wanted just to clip through a couple of things because I know there are a lot of questions that need to be asked. So couple of things that I see are real highlights that are the benefits of making this really go to scale. One is the beautiful intersection that occurs between schools and communities, and also bringing in teacher preparation programs in a very positive way. One of the roles that Barksdale has played here has been to broker public and private efforts. I want to give a shout out to my friend and colleague, Jamie Raspberry, who's with the Mississippi Alliance for Nonprofits and Philanthropy. I hope she's still listening. We have been working very heavily trying to get connectivity and devices into kids. So that's been the work that we've been consumed by. But I hope that we can turn our sights soon to really monitoring this and getting involved in this, expanding the tutor efforts in Mississippi. Certainly the tutoring is also the training ground for pre-service teachers and a recruitment and retention tool for others. Not the social and emotional component that these young tutors particularly bring to these young kids is just can't be overstated. I've made a note here about sound curriculum, and I do want to talk about that because I want to emphasize that this is not just high dose, but high quality. Because if you give a big dose of something that's not very good, it's not going to work. So what you choose to use, and I think Tennessee sounds like they've learned some lessons about that, is really critical. I want to point you to, and I think it's in the chat somewhere, and someone has also already mentioned it, proventutoring.org. This is an organization that was formed by, it was the brainchild of Bob Slavin, who created a program called Success for All. And he reached out to colleagues across the country who were doing research around what interventions worked. And they've come together to form an organization right now is focusing on tutoring in general, but they envision expanding to proven math, proven reading, proven science. They're looking to expand what works. I think the tutoring process is a great way to expand this and make this link between evidence-based practices and taking it to scale in places where it's not happening. I also want to reinforce the importance of clear metrics. Some of my pushback in the work that we've done here in Mississippi is we count seats instead of impact. So it's not just enough for a tutor to show up every time or for the kid to show up every time. If we're not really measuring impact, and I mean, is reading improving, then we're not getting the job done. So I just want to emphasize that. And I guess I'd close out by saying, we know what works in reading. We know that there's some really effective programs out there. That doesn't mean that we need to be cookie cutter necessarily, but what Mississippi did was we selected some things that we knew were proven, and we did it everywhere. And once you implement those proven practices, kids will learn to read. And I think this is a good opportunity for educators, seasoned educators, to sit back and see what happens when you implement a program with fidelity over time and you provide the coaching support. Kids will learn to read. So I'm excited about this, and I'm hoping that the feds are going to kick in with the National Tutoring Corps big budget. They're already talking about $15 billion. So buckle up. We may be on to something. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that. And provides a great opportunity to use these proven models and really have the funding to push them forward if we get that additional federal funding. So I realize we are close to the end of our time together, but just would like to invite, and I hope that all the questions that we saw coming in have been answered in the Q&A box, but I would love to invite all of our funders, actually all of our panelists, to turn their videos back on for a quick second. Love to hear your thoughts and insights, in particular on, so many of these programs and this additional potential federal funding might be coming because of COVID-19, but these are amazing, effective tutoring programs that are needed whether there's a pandemic or not. I'd love to hear any quick closing thoughts that any of you might have in terms of the roles that philanthropy can play to promote high dosage tutoring and effective programs is something that can be sustained far beyond the pandemic. And any reflections or advice that you might offer to the other funders who are listening in, who have been inspired and energized to take action based upon what all of you have shared?
I can jump in and just say that to the point about scaling, one thing we really saw, because we looked at what Tennessee had done, Tennessee pulled together pieces that exist in all 50 states, and that's the Boys and Girls Clubs. And all states have teacher prep programs also. So I think when we look forward, when we look at scaling up and using government funding, ESSER funding, whatever it is, setting up something up front that can then scale easily because the existing pieces are everywhere is just critical. There are many other organizations we can partner with. We're going to be working with YMCAs. There are all kinds of one-off nonprofits who work with kids in the afternoons. But to get something going really quickly, just by the 80-20 rule, having a model where those same pieces exist everywhere is just a huge start, because now there's a template. We took Tennessee's template. Other people can now look at both of us. There are other wonderful things that are going on this call, and that's how we're going to get it done.
Who else wants to chime in?
I just want to tie together what I've been hearing about a growth mindset and the importance of coaching and relationships to that. And that goes for the leaders of the program, the tutors, and the scholars themselves. And I love how that's been baked into so many programs and how coaching facilitates that practice. Because really, what is tutoring but coaching, right?
Well, and there's actually some research that suggests that when a practitioner gets training, they tend to apply 5 to 15% of what they've learned in training. But when you add a coach, that application goes up to 95%. So good training is critical, but without the coaching, the application sometimes doesn't happen. So that's another reason to build that into your program.
A quick question that's just come in from Marilyn Bellis, asking if there's any challenges that anyone has seen related to doing tutoring programs during the school year versus summer, any, after school versus summer programs, because there's so many other demands for kids' time after school. Catherine?
We haven't actually started our after-school program yet, but one challenge that we're already encountering is the duration of the program. So in the summer, we had a much longer duration per day than we do in the after-school program. It's a very short period of time, and that is a challenge.
And certainly in Patterson, that's why we were looking at a Saturday plus model, because the Boys and Girls Club, there's the kids need a break, there's a homework, there's a meal, and then time is limited. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll just chime in that, Saga, which is probably the best form of tutoring, would tell you the most effective tutoring happens during the school day. And in concert with the teacher. So there's a tutor and there's a teacher and there's a conversation constantly happening around where are the learning gaps and how can I support this student to address those. So I think ideally during the school day is where you want to see it. We didn't have that luxury last summer. We just kind of needed to operate when we did. But I do think there's so much value in saying summer slide is such a real concern, and we see evidence of it. And so how can we think about leaning on Boys and Girls Clubs? We also did lean on the YMCAs to begin to address some of these gaps that we know are created over the summer.
All right, well, I could continue talking and learning with you all day long, but I know that we've come to the end of our 90 minutes together. So I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you, to Laura and Catherine and Carrie and Melissa in New Jersey, to Emily and to Kelly and Jamie, all across the United States. I'd also like to say thank you to all of you who joined in for this special rebroadcast conversation. I hope you found it as informative and inspiring as I did and are leaving with new ideas for supporting high dosage tutoring and supporting equitable learning recovery. I'd also like to invite you all to tune back in next week for another special rebroadcast conversation, with this one exploring strategies for addressing teacher staffing challenges with Jill Violette and Amanda Von Moose of Substantial Classrooms, and Jeremy Anderson from Education Commission of the States, Cheryl Cotton of California Department of Education, Jason Midwood of Central Falls School District, and Marquise Taylor of Coaching for Change. Stay tuned for more informative, engaging sessions to be happening throughout the new year. Thank you all again. Have a great rest of your day and a happy new year.